Welcome to Be Wise, information about cannabis for older adults. Brought to you by Active Aging Canada, a national charity that supports older adults living well and remaining active. Production for this podcast was made possible through a financial contribution from Health Canada's Substance Use and Addictions Program. Now, let's go to the Active Aging Canada studios and join National Executive Director Patty Clark and Ward Maxwell, Director of Marketing and Communications. Today on the show, the risks associated with falls, driving, addiction, and withdrawal.
Last week, we spoke about the side effects associated with cannabis use. Today, we want to talk about the risks, which are quite different than side effects.
That's right, Patty. Like walking under a ladder is a risk and someone dripping paint on you is a side effect.
I think that's a good clarification, Ward. Hopefully people understand that. But in essence, you are right. When it comes to cannabis consumption, there are certainly risks for older adults. And one of that is the risk of falls. THC, which we've spoken about, which has a psychoactive effect, is thought to connect with the receptors in the body, and that affects coordination, balance, and depth perception. These are all abilities that decline with age, and that's just a natural aging process. But the added changes in balance are gait, and gait is how we walk, and our walk also changes as we get older. For people who use cannabis, it can also increase the risk of their falls. So it's really important that people consider this if they're going to consider using cannabis. Another side effect is the drowsiness and dizziness that you can be affected with that with cannabis. And that can also contribute to instability and falling in older people. So there is some research, but right now it's very limited on this topic. There is a small percentage of older adult cannabis users who do report feeling uneasy on their feet. So if you're thinking about using cannabis products, please take this into account until you see how it affects you so that you can ensure that you're going to be safe.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the risk of driving after you've been using cannabis products. The first and foremost thing to emphasize in this is driving after cannabis consumption is illegal in Canada, and that can last up to 24 hours after you have used cannabis. That's what the government recommends. We have different evidence and different research that shows different periods of time where the cannabis continues to affect you, but from the point of view of the law, if you use cannabis, you should not drive for 24 hours after. Some of the effects of cannabis use, such as drowsiness, can last that long, and it can also take that long for the effects to wear off. In fact, it depends on how much and how often you consumed it and whether you smoked or ate it. But we have to emphasize again to you, it's illegal to drive after consuming cannabis, so don't do it.
Another risk that's important to chat about is the risk of addiction. Older adults have the same risk to addiction as younger people do. Age is not discriminatory here. Whether you're old or young, you can still become addicted to something. Addiction has other words too. We could call it substance use disorder or dependence. But what it really means is that, in other words, an individual needs a drug and it has taken over and it's causing big problems in their life and in the relationship. That's how we could describe an addiction. So older adults who have other substance use disorders or addictions, such as alcohol, they really need to avoid cannabis use.
Now I'm going to talk about withdrawal risk. Patty just spoke to you about the risks of addiction. The brain adapts to the presence of cannabinoids when one uses those, and this may lead to dependence, or the addiction that Patty described. If a person suddenly stops using the cannabinoids, they may go through withdrawal. About 15% of older cannabis users have withdrawal symptoms when they stop. Often, these are prolonged users, long-term users. Research on withdrawal in older adults is very limited. It's a lot like everything else we've been telling you about cannabis. We know some, but we don't know a lot. So the research on withdrawal in older adults is limited. The research we have shows older adults have withdrawal symptoms similar to those of younger adults. These symptoms include irritability, restlessness, insomnia or interrupted sleep, anxiety, and or loss of appetite. It can take a few days and up to 4 weeks for all withdrawal symptoms to go away. So much like we tell you throughout these podcasts, stay calm, take time, it will eventually wear off. And that's it for this week. We'll come back next week to talk to you about overconsumption and the risks for lifelong users. Thanks, Patty.
Thanks, Ward. Talk to you next week.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. For more information, go to activeagingcanada.ca, where you can order a copy of our Be Wise booklet. It's available in 17 languages and is free. The views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily represent the views of Health Canada's Substance Use and Addictions Program. Join us for our next podcast, and until then, remember to be active, be healthy, and be wise.